Good? Alright, let's get rocking here. Alright, let's go. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's a horrible clap.
Oh, we gotta get rid of this clap.
Avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan.
You have to avoid it.
They got stuff for that now.
Fact.
Hey, everybody, it's Rob, National Fire Radio. Good morning. It's, what is it, Sunday?
Sunday morning.
I didn't drink with Tucker last night, and I'm having a Tucker reaction here.
Well, it kind of spills over.
Yeah. Osmosis. Anyhow, we're here in the studio with Jack Dewan, Irish Tillerman, and we're going to have a pretty good... Actually, this is going to be fantastic. So
It's going to be awesome. It's already been a good 2 hours since we've been sitting here. Jack, good morning. Thanks for joining us, brother.
Guys, thank you for having me. Total privilege. It was 4 hours to get here, and I'd do it again. This was, But I'm
4 hours to come see us?
I guess
sorry, brother.
Am I a little retarded? I don't even know.
Listen, thank you. Thank you for doing that for us.
Thank you.
And it's been cool, man. This is what we do.
I never had guilt of disappointing somebody so much. I know we had 4 hours to be excited about this. So.
But Jack, awesome. I mean, you're a guy that you and I had talked quite a long time ago and reached out to each other just through Instagram, and I think that's important to talk about real quick before we get into your bio and everything. There's so much good coming out of social media. We always talk about the bad, but there's a lot of good coming out of it.
Most definitely.
And you and I wouldn't be sitting here today with you if it wasn't for Instagram.
Right.
So I love it, man. So thank you for the support, following National Fire Radio and chatting with us.
Thank you.
And so on. But let's do this, man. Let's get into Jack's story.
Yeah.
It's quite a story.
All right, Jack. So born
in Boston, raised in West Roxbury. Typical, blue collar Irish neighborhood, like everything else in Boston. Played hockey. Son of a fireman. My father was on the job in Brookline, which, for those of you who don't know, the general Boston area, Brookline's its own town that was part of Boston and kind of defected. They're surrounded by Boston on three sides. And then his father, Boston fireman, and his father, Boston fireman. My great grandfather, John Devine, actually he got on the job in January of 1900. And somewhere along the line, the name changed. It was originally O Devine, then we lost the O. I don't know if it was Ellis Island or what. And then during the Depression, the name changed from Devine to Dewan. There's talk that it may have sounded more French than Irish because, everywhere you went, Irish need not apply in the windows and things like that. And so my great-grandfather got on in 1900. Then his, I'm trying to think of who was next. My great-uncle Bill, I think he got on like 1921. Which is weird because my grandfather wasn't born until 22, so there was like a large gap in that whole side, that part of the family back then.
Right.
So my great uncle Bill got on like 22, somewhere in there. Then there was another brother Charlie who was on. And if you've ever seen Bill Noonan's photo books, there's pictures of all of them in there in black and white. Actually, the one book, Wooden Sticks and Iron Men, there's a picture of my great uncle Charlie sitting on the back of Rescue 2. And it's funny because Bill and Charlie were both in Rescue 2 at different points in their career. But then, so anyway, growing up in West Roxbury and my father being on the job and, my father's his regular brother Bill, not his uncle, because there's a couple of them. I was born in 79, so I remember as a very young child, and even before I can remember, I've seen pictures in strollers with my father pushing me, at fires. Because, growing up in New England, generally speaking, if you're in the fire department, you're a buff. Or up there, they'll call him a spark. So like in New York City you've got the Bell Club, or was it the Gong Club of Jersey City? In Boston it's the Boston Sparks Association. Growing up in that whole era and aura, that's just what it was. I can remember being a kid in my parents' basement and the old Bearcat 210 scanners, right? I'm not that old, but I may be showing a little bit. If the weather was hitting right, we'd be sitting there, and I think the town of Wakefield had like the same frequency as the Bronx. Oh no, but I think Providence was the same as the Bronx. Wakefield was like citywide, all the 154 frequencies. So there'd be like a thunderstorm coming up the coast, and I'd hear my father downstairs talking on the rotary phone to whomever from the firehouse, ranting and raving about whatever in the job at that point. And all of a sudden you hear this accent that didn't sound like us. Telephone alarm, Brooklyn Bucks, all of a sudden, my head would snap at like 6 years old because I'm like, that doesn't sound normal. Because it's not the Boston beeps that everybody hears. And then all of a sudden the phone would start ringing. Hey, New York's coming in. Hey, New York's coming in. And then my father would be calling, so, hey, New York's coming in. And literally it would be like a thing. Guys would just, show up and they'd sit in the basement and listen to New York because, there was no internet then. You could listen to bravest.com now or whatever. Broadcastify, but back then it was it's something that they wouldn't actually hear, but because everybody was such a huge buff, that's what they would do. Like I can remember, my uncle, who we've talked about, who was killed in the Trade Center, when he was still, I'll call him a kid, he was in his 20s. Him and I were 13 years apart, but he was driving a bus for the MBTA, and I don't know if you remember East Coast paging, way back, like when you had big giant computer-sized pages. Right. So this, again, a horrible ADD. This guy, Paul Trahan, who's actually a PL Vulcan instructor, who worked with my father in Brookline at Ladder 2, he ran East Coast paging. This was back in the 80s. And they all had the teletypes. They would hook into the telephone, like AOL time, like the beep, 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 beep to try to get online. And so they'd be sitting in my father's basement, when the New York scanner would be booming through, all of a sudden out came the teletype because Gerard had one because he was typing for East Coast paging, and everything would be going off. And then, there was 2 lines at one point because my father got a separate one so we could actually use the internet because we were that advanced. So I don't know if you ever heard the name Artie O'Leary before. He's unfortunately deceased now. He died in 99. He was a Boston fireman. He's originally from Staten Island. And he was in the fire patrol in the 60s, went to Hartford. I don't know if this kind of rings a bell or not. He was a Hartford fireman for like 2 or 3 years. And then he went to Boston. He was in Ladder 23. He was in Rescue 1. Heavy, thick New York accent, big white handlebar mustache. And he used to sell T-shirts. And he was also a biker and a whole bunch of other things. But he'd sell tourniquet. But he was a legend. Well, anyway, he'd call up and I'd answer the phone. And he'd be like, "Hey, Jerry." I'm like, "No, it's Jack." "Oh, sorry, Jackie. Put your uncle on the phone." "Okay." But Artie was the guy who was. You ever hear the citywide buff radio networks? Yeah. So Boston had one too. And as a kid, when the skip would be coming in, and you'd think that New York was booming through the radio, it wasn't. It was just Artie giving out like a multiple. Somebody he'd be like, citywide announcing, and the city of Lynn, a second alarm has been transmitted. And the time now is 0023, dispatcher 123. And I'm like, "Dad, New York's coming in." No, it's just Artie.
That's so as a kid, I mean, you're growing up in this. I mean, you are completely immersed.
I was gonna say, you're immersed. You're doctored in.
There was no way out of it. I mean, it was the fire department. Like I played hockey my whole life. Like I started playing hockey in like 1983. And, that was a huge passion. But I always knew that the fire department was it because that's all I really knew. I mean, like we talked off camera before, 5 years old, I'm reading Firehouse and Fire Engineering and WNYF, and I could tell you all the different things about all these different departments and what they were doing, But meanwhile, I can't, diagram a sentence in English class.
No, I get it, man. I'm right there with you, and I grew up very much the same way. Just completely immersed in this, and that's where my love and passion has come from.
Right.
And I'm very much on board with your story. I get it. So fast forward a little bit. So growing up in this type of household, I mean, you're living in Boston, correct?
Right. Yep.
So there's no volunteer fire service. There's nothing, right? I mean, it's either you get on the job
or you don't.
You'd be a spark.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, as a kid, we'd be sitting downstairs, and this was back. I don't know if you've ever heard of Stackpole and Bemis. There were 2 arsonists in Boston that were lighting everything off. Early '80s, and I remember as a kid, again, there's rotary phone ringing. "Hey, there's a fire in wherever." "Okay, I'll meet you at the Dunkin' Donuts," and a bunch of off-duty firemen would meet, and we'd all go. Well, I was a kid in the car seat, and off we went. But with that being said, I forget where I was going with this. You mentioned the volunteer thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got into the other stuff. Anyway, ADD again.
I get
it. So, reading like Firehouse magazine, now I'm like 6, 7, 8. I actually know how to read at this point. It's not just whatever. And I remember reading an article about a Kentland fireman, and it said, volunteer fire department, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "Dad, what's volunteer?" Like, I'd never even heard of it before. He goes, "Oh, volunteer, usually small towns, guys, they come from home and they go get the fire truck and go to the fire." And I'm like, "What?" I don't get it. Like, couldn't wrap my head around it. Had no concept.
Right.
I'm like, "Well, how do they get paid?" He goes, "They don't." I'm like, "What do you mean they don't get paid?" I'm like, "Well, how do they pay their bills?" He's like, "Well, they have regular jobs." I'm like what? He was whatever. He's like, they could be, butcher, baker, candlestick maker. It doesn't matter. They have a job, and then at night when the siren goes off or the pager goes off, they go pick up the fire truck. Totally flabbergasted. Had no idea what any of this meant, and just blew my mind.
I think it's really funny because for me, I found out that you could be a paid firefighter.
Right.
And I went back to my dad. I'm like, "Dad, you don't have to do this for free anymore. You can get paid to do this."
Right.
Like, instead of going to the electric company, you'd show up to a fire station and they'll give you a paycheck.
Yeah.
And he was just like,
"Slow down."
I know. I know how it works. I'm like, "No, you don't. I'm telling you. don't have to work for NYSEG anymore. And he's like, no,
Yeah,
it's not going to work out that way. And I was
total
like, all right.
cultural difference. I mean,
Sure.
The Metro Boston area, and I try to describe it to some people who don't understand is like imagine like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, both Commonwealths. So you've got I know Pennsylvania's got like boroughs and townships and all that stuff. Massachusetts is either cities and towns. That's it.
Right.
And the majority of them are career fire departments. And it's a very union strong state. Democratic state's always been a union stronghold, and you'll get this one thing called Metro Fire, which you've got the city of Boston. Its nickname is the hub, and then you've got all these surrounding jurisdictions. And up until recently, I'm sure most of them still have it, but most of them still have their game wall systems.
Right.
So like when I worked as a fire alarm operator in the town of Brookline, which is surrounded by Boston, we bordered Boston and we bordered the city of Newton. So we would have a game well tapper for Boston, for Brookline, and for Newton. And on the Zetron machine, if Boston was striking a box, I'd have Boston Channel 1 locked on a scanner above the radio console so I knew what was going on. But I would know that, if they were striking, and they're very Buffy or Sparky or however you want to say it, in the way they run their communication centers. So they have their box tone, which is a solid long beep. And then if it's one of the old time, I call them crusty, it sound like, Fran Drescher smoking 8 packs a day. You hear, the long beep and then, all companies on the air stand by for an alarm of fire in district, and there'll be a long pause, like to make everybody wait, 10. Well, I would know that as a fire alarm operator in Brookline that, engine 6 would respond to boxes in district 10. So I'll be listening, striking box 2858 Byron Road at Westgate Road, and I know that that's an engine 6 line box. So immediately I'm activating engine 6's lights because my whole goal was to send my father to a fire in Boston and have them beat the Boston companies, because that was just, it wasn't frequent, but, every once in a while that type of thing would happen. But
So growing up, right? So you're immersed in this culture.
Yep.
You're growing up in it. You have to get hired to become a fireman.
Right.
Right. And so you're getting of age, right? We talked about you went off to college.
Right.
Which you and I had a little,
backdoor connection.
Yeah, right. Which is wild. My brother actually went to the same college that he went to.
Yeah.
And they had a volunteer engine company on the campus, and that's
Student
how I
run.
remember it as a younger kid. Like,
Yeah.
So anyway, we hit on those stories, but bring it a little bit fast forward because I want to get into your career and I want to talk about the love for this job and just kind of paint that picture. But so you're a Boston guy. You're now a Baltimore City fireman.
Right.
You made your way through New York City as well.
Right.
So let's talk about Massachusetts, where it started. So you got hired as a fire alarm dispatcher.
Right. And actually, even before that. So,
Yeah.
and this kind of goes back into the college story. So
Do it.
we kind of have to touch upon that.
Yeah, it's fine.
So graduated high school in '97. Still 17. I was a September baby, so it's kind of like that weird calendar stretch. And started college in August. So a 17-year-old kid. But when I went out there for the original, like the tour to see where you wanted to go to school, we're walking down one of the driveways, and the dorms are on the right, and there's like an old auditorium on the left, and there's this white garage sticking out of like a hill. I'm like, what's that? And I think it was a girl we were walking with. She's probably hot, but I don't remember. So that's a whole other issue. We'll get to that later, maybe off camera. So I'm like, what's that? She goes, oh, that's the fire department. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, you have a fire department on campus? She's like, oh, yeah, it's a student-run volunteer fire department. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Ching.
I'm like, okay. So I kind of kept that in the back of my head, and I could see my father's wheels turning, going, oh, no.
Yeah.
He's never
So,
going to
right.
class.
So we go to the down to the field house and talk about sports and stuff. And I was a hockey player, so like, yeah, we've got a Division III hockey team, and I was playing for a good school in high school. So like, all right, I'll come here, I'll play hockey, I'll join the volunteer fire department, I'll do my thing, blah blah blah. Okay, sure. So I go to this school, and I'm there about a year and a half. Was playing hockey, and I ended up getting into the fire department in the campus, but then in the town that it was in, the town of Dudley. And I was like, why am I going to college? This is like, I just want to be a fireman,
Yeah.
which is also retarded, but this is a whole other story. Not politically correct in the least, by the way. So I quit school and went and, get into the fire department, and, small town, but it's kind of funny because it's small town, Dudley, people are like, where the hell is Dudley? Amazing guys, like some of the greatest firemen I've ever had the privilege to learn from as a young guy. I got there November 25th of '97. I got appointed, and there were guys there who got on in the '60s, and and those guys were taught by God knows what generation before that. So it was like that. Once removed, like my father would always talk about, like he got on in '75. And talks about the World War II guys that he learned from that were the senior men of the job when they get on. And even though I didn't have that exposure, it was like that once removed. Yeah. So some of the stuff that they taught me, it may not be totally relevant now because things have changed so much, but it sticks with you. Stupid stuff like, and granted, operational procedures are different everywhere you go. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's just the way we do things.
Right.
But if whenever you're going to the rear, always take the 40-footer.
40-footer.
Because they still carried it then.
Yeah, right.
So, I remember, taking, banger ladders and things like that. Because you'd have, in the front, it may only be 2 stories, but in the rear, it's 4 stories of rear porches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A 35 is not going to make it. Just little conversations like that. But anyway, so small town of Dudley, and ended up working in EMS. I was working for a couple of privates and so on. And I got hired as a fire alarm dispatcher in Brookline. This was just after 9/11, which we have that whole other story too.
Yeah.
That's different. So working there, and that's when the guy who I was working with there had told me about New York City hiring provisional fire alarm dispatchers. So I stayed in Brookline for about 2 years. Yeah, I left there in 2003 because I got hired in New York City May 12th of 2003. And I went there, and I had taken the firefighter's exam. 2043 was the list number. There was like 40,000 applicants or something, and I had a 98 on the written, had 100 in the physical agility. My uncle who got killed in the trade center, I had his address, so I had 5 points residency, so I had a score of 104, which gave me a list number of 493. I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, that's...
I'm going to, this is it. So,
Right.
Meeting all sorts of different people through the course of life. They're like, kid, that's like first or second class. You're getting in.
You get the golden ticket.
Okay, great. So fast forward, go through the interview, the psych, the background check, nailed all of it because I was a pretty boring person. I never got in trouble. My mouth hadn't got me in trouble yet, which is a whole nother story. So I got hired in communications in the meantime, thinking, all right, well, let me go down there and I'll start learning the city. I'll start making connections, figuring out where my niche is. And I ended up living in my uncle's apartment, which a guy he went to Probu school with, his name is Sean Cummins. He's now a fire marshal. He's getting close to retirement. They got first class in 96, so they've got their 20 years now. But anyway, so was living there and living in Rockaway.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And Boston kid in New York City is kind of awkward anyway. As soon as I opened my mouth, I couldn't hide it. Like I went down. There's this place down on Beach 101st Street called the 101 Deli. I think it's still there. It's like the best sandwiches I've ever had in my life. So I walk in Boston, everything's a sub.
Yeah,
so I walk in,
right.
I'm like, yeah, you could get a large Italian sub. And it was like, the glass fell off the wall, the record scratched. Like,
Did you hear what this guy just said?
Listen, this guy thinks he's funny. You want a what? I'm like, sub? Like, you mean a hero? I'm like, okay. They're
Yep.
like, seated or no? I'm like,
Yep.
sure. I'm like, I don't know. What's a seated hero? I never even heard of it.
Right.
I'm like, just make it however you make it. I'll
Right,
eat it. Anyway, off the topic.
That's funny.
So I ended up getting jammed up on the medical. My natural physical makeup, I have a high heart rate. So at that point, I was 23, 24. My heart rate should not have exceeded 176 beats per minute on the medical exam, which the medical there, they actually put you on the step mill and wear the weight vest and they monitor you and everything else. So my heart rate was at 196. And at that point, I was like, 30, 40 pounds lighter. I was still, an athlete and everything else. But my genetic makeup, nope, sorry, kid, you'll never be a fireman. What?
Wow.
Okay. So I stayed there and I worked in communications for about 6 years. It was awesome. I made some amazing friends.
In Brooklyn.
Yeah, mostly in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I worked in the field comm unit for a while on a skin, like 90-day details and back and forth, and made some great friends. And then I got promoted to supervising dispatcher, and I floated amongst all 5 boroughs, but mainly I was in Manhattan and the Bronx as a tour supervisor. And actually, my very first day as a supervising dispatcher was in Manhattan on Thanksgiving. And so here I was staying at this girl I was with at the time. She was living in Long Island. And I come in the Long Island Expressway and I go over the 59th Street Bridge, and I'm looking at the skyline of Manhattan. And I'm like 25 years old. And I'm like saying to myself, I'm responsible for all of this.
Yeah.
What did I get myself into? And so in sure shit, that was the year that one of the balloons, like one of the cables, had taken down a lamppost. It fell and killed a guy. Right. There was a fire uptown. We had a high-rise downtown, which requires a completely different response. You have to transmit different boxes. 9031 and 9032 get transmitted, which take companies from Brooklyn, an engine, a truck, and a chief over the Manhattan Bridge, and an engine, truck, and a chief through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. And basically, whoever gets there first goes to the fire. Whoever gets there second gets relocated. It's for any 1076 or 77 below Chambers Street, which is all sorts of technical stuff.
This is wild. Yeah,
this is a whole nother. There's really no reason for this to even be in my brain anymore because I'm never going to use it again unless I'm talking to you guys.
Yeah.
So we understand though,
right?
It stays in there forever,
right? So I don't even know where I was going with this, but
but I mean, what an interesting time, right?
I want to kind of go back to Brookline though about being a dispatcher in Massachusetts because one of the things that we kind of find interesting with the podcast and the platform is the terminology. And I know there's and we were talking to Chief Thode in Bridgeport, and he was talking about the 3 woods and hooking up big and whatnot. What terminology was there in?
So a lot of unique stuff. Something that I've never heard anywhere else except for just the Metro Boston area is, can you check the still?
Okay, and what's that mean?
So if I said you check the still, be like, are we making moonshine? What are we doing?
Right.
No. So obviously, fire service all started its notifications using bells. Right, whether it was the church bells or bells in the firehouse, we all use bells. So a still alarm, the bells are silent, which means that it's like a single unit response. So instead of somebody saying, if you're in New York City, hey, do you have a 10-7? Or hey, can you check the callback? Or Boston, Brookline, Newton, can you check the still? Meaning referring to the still bells because the bells are silent because it was a silent response of one unit. Can you check the still? And all they're doing is asking for a callback. That's one of those random.
That's cool.
It's kind of funny. So working in Brookline, originally they had fire alarm operators that were part of the fire union, Local 950, and then the police department had police call takers who were civilian, but then actually route officers, regular cops, would take their rotation through working police radio. Excuse me. And the town decided to combine the communications effort. So I think there was 6 or 7 police call takers. There was 5 fire alarm operators. And then there were 7 new hires, which I was one of. And we were all in different classifications because it was, a merger. But then the old fire alarm operators couldn't be in the fire union anymore because they weren't employees of the fire department. And the police call takers couldn't be in, I don't know if they were in NAGE
or whatever.
I don't they were in something else. So we ended up becoming Teamsters. So we had 3 different rates. And the town was kind of afraid because if you mess with the Teamsters, you can have a big pink inflatable rat out front, and the police department doesn't want that in front of the police station.
Yeah.
But anyway, so going back, working on the fire radio, working in the police station, there's always that rivalry, cops and firemen and whatever. But the cops would always break balls about the vernacular that the fire department would use, we're striking the box. So the cop he'd be using a little hammer to strike this little box. Hey, look we're the fire department. I'm like, all right, whatever. You're in it. I'm not going to say it. Anyway. But the term striking the box, goes back to, again, before radios.
Yeah.
And you guys, you have an alarm box right there. You probably know the whole story. But they had no concept of that. And trying to explain that to people. And then in other places where they never had a game mode system or they never tapped out boxes over a bell system, and they don't know how to count a prefix or any of those things. They don't know that, if you've got, I forget because it's been so long, but in Boston, you've got 12, 13, 14, 15 prefixes. It's a school or a public building or, a transit facility,
right.
So striking 12-1234 for, whatever, and you'll get 1 beep, 2 beeps, then a pause. And then, the rest of the box being transmitted. And they would still do that. Actually, even still now, they still transmit over the radio, even though they remove the bells. They have a Purvis system now that's all automated, kind of like New York City's, but a little bit different.
There's places in New Jersey, they don't do it anymore, but there's places in New Jersey that the trumpets on the roof of the volunteer firehouse would ring out the box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We still do that.
So, the
box number.
The town-wide alerting system?
Yeah, it'll tone out. I know where the box is when it's coming in.
You still have that in your town?
Yeah.
They allow that?
The one thing I always got to when from some of the senior guys in Poughkeepsie was after union meetings and kicking back a couple beers.
Right.
They'd go out with a game-o key and open up the box and tap in another box on another circuit.
Yeah.
And the civilian dispatcher would be like, I don't understand why this box is coming in. It's on the wrong circuit. And then they dispatch it and be like, it only rang in once. And the captain would be like,
right.
Yeah,
Got the shunt key out.
So that's wild. So Brookline, so you go down terminology. I mean, there's a lot more, right? Triple decker. I mean, there's tons, right?
3-decker, triple decker. There's I said the check the still or I don't know where to go.
I know, there's so much of it.
What were some of the good fires that you do you have any of those incidents where you took the phone call and you're just like, oh man, these guys are gonna get so much work?
In New York City, I could I have a whole ton of them, and some of them I have recordings of. In Brookline's it's strange because Brookline's a very affluent community. Yeah. You'd never know you weren't in Boston. 3, 4, 5-story brownstones and huge, colonials and high-rise apartments and everything else. But the world's not burning down, which is good for them. I mean, you don't want that. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's tremendous firemen there, and they do get work. It's not like it's made of asbestos. Like they do go to fires, but it's just it's different. I mean, it's the rest of America. It's alarm bells and medicals and car accidents and the standard
bells
stuff.
And people who fell.
Right, exactly. So in Brookline, there's not.
Or anywhere, even in the city.
So I remember my very first. I was working in. I think it was my first night tour. We're working in Brooklyn, and most people have heard of Warren Fuchs.
Yeah, of course.
So I was in his group. He wasn't my group because he's the man, and I'm just the Roby. So it was him, myself, another female dispatcher, and I have to see how I can tactfully put this because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. The other people who were on the tour were unavailable. They may have been in the bathroom or whatever.
Right.
So anyway, I'm sitting at the voice alarm, which is the two-way intercom system to the firehouses, and fire phone rings. So I pick it up, and as a probie, my number was 814. So I pick, fire department dispatcher 814. What's the address of the fire? So Fuchs picks up the other handset and plugs in because it's like the old telephone circuit handsets that we're plugging in. So he's listening, with the handset up, so you don't hear him breathing. And you hear this guy, he's like, oh, yeah, I'm at Kings Highway in East 16th Street in the Kings Highway Deli. Oh, shit, the window just popped. And you hear Fuchs, hey, kid, that's a quality call. I'm like, okay. So I process the information and I send it over to the DD, which is the decision dispatcher. And so Fuchs, he says, hey, kid, I'm going to load this up. I'm like, okay. And in their term, loaded up means they're going to send 4-2 rescuing squad.
Full.
Right, because normally a regular structural assignment is just 2-2 and a chief, barring 1014 engines and all that other stuff. So 276 to Brooklyn Urgent, 1075, whatever. And that one always sticks with me because, here him taking this phone call. Oh, shit, the window just popped.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, okay, I'm not going to put that in the description line, but, okay, fire out the window of the Kings Highway Deli. Sent cool. It out and, yeah.
You got the senior guy behind you, right? Fuchs is behind you going, we're going to load that up.
Yep.
It sounds like it's work.
Yeah.
Have you ever stacked just knowing from the phone call all right, I'm gonna start lining up with the second alarm's gonna be on this because you knew.
Yeah, it's kind of a case by case. And working in New York, I mean, there's a certain, I don't want to call it a playbook, but there's a certain mentality on how certain things go. But we would do the same things all the time. So if there was a fire in Williamsburg up that way and 108 truck was on it, generally would always take 176 truck and they'd go right up Broadway and they'd transfer, relocate to 108. Or you take 170, in Canarsie and they may go down towards Sheepshead Bay and relocate, So you always had the same companies do it always time. But if it was a busy day and you had, a couple of all hands going, well, then it was out the window. You just or you get companies from out of borough.
But I think what's interesting, just from my limited knowledge of New York City and the way that the dispatchers are so, and I don't know if this still remains true today, but I'm sure it does because that culture doesn't really disappear. But I mean, I know, you hear the stories of these guys back in the day. I mean, they knew every left and right that these companies would take. Yeah. They knew by the voice of each officer of who and how they respond, and how the dispatcher is such calling audibles for the companies, but knows because he already knows what's happening before the companies know it. It's incredible to listen to some of that Warriors footage,
that's such a dying art too, because I mean, now you got to figure I work in Baltimore City, right? And I live in Pennsylvania. Right. So I'm nowhere near there, but all these guys, and that brings up one particular story I'll never forget as long as I live, this guy, George Munch. He's also now retired. Him and Warren were called the Brooklyn Cowboys.
Right.
So I'm a probie. I'm sitting, we called it 3. It was BCT 3, the call taking terminal next to the radio. And busy night, whatever. And a box goes out. It was on Arlington Place or something. I think it's off of Nostrand Avenue. And I couldn't picture where it was. And George Munch, who had been there for forever, and he was in the patrol before he was a dispatcher, and he was a fire safety director at the World Trade Center, which is a whole different story altogether. I said, George, where's Arlington Place? And he goes, it's probably right here. And there's a big, so we're sitting at the mic, right? Literally, George is sitting right here, and there's a huge map of Brooklyn behind us. That's probably about right here. Yep, and that's exactly where it was. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Yeah. So, but he'd be the guy that he would work every 4th of July specifically. And then I got to see it in person during the blackout, August 14th of 2003, the East Coast blackout. I was a probie working.
So my wife and I were just talking about that because I couldn't remember when that blackout was. It was 2003?
Yep, and I know it was August 14th because that was my dispatcher number. I was 814.
Ah, okay.
And I was in Pennsylvania, and that's when like Nextel was huge.
Yeah.
So
I remember it. Yeah, I remember it.
Coming up the PA Turnpike to the Jersey Turnpike to go back to New York because I was supposed to work the following day. So my father hits me on the Nextel, and he's like, Jackie, where are you? I'm like, I'm in Jersey. Why? The whole world's got no power. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, the whole East Coast got no power. New York's going crazy. And I'm like, and of course, he's at home in Boston listening on thebravest.com.
Yeah, right.
Because that was the thing.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay. Well, I was like, I'm near like exit 7. So like, I don't really see anything going on. And then as I get further up, I'm near like, I want to say it was like what the refineries. It's north. Yeah, it's north of like exit 10.
Yeah.
And I'm looking off to the left, and it looked like Saudi Arabia. Like all of the oil refineries, their relief valves let go, and they're all burning. And I'm like, oh, okay. And actually, I had a brand new Toyota Tacoma at the time, and I used to keep a disposable camera in the armrest in case, total buff.
Yeah.
And so because this is before like cell phone cameras and all this stuff that wasn't really a thing yet. And I stopped and took a picture, and then I had the scanner. I started finally picking it up, and this guy, Mike Boucher, was on Brooklyn Radio. He's retired now. And actually, if you've ever seen a book called Badges of the Bravest, no, I'm sorry, not bad. That's Gary Urbanowitz. Mike Boucher did the line of duty death book for New York City.
Okay.
Like every line of duty death ever in the history of the fire department. And I remember he used to work on that in the Brooklyn CO. Anyway, another story for another time. But so they're giving out like stuck elevator all over the borough. So I'm like, you know what? I should probably go into work tonight. So I shot over to Rockaway, took a shower with like the last bit of hot water that was in the tank, packed a bag, went to Brooklyn. So by the time I finally get to the Brooklyn CO, it's nighttime. And I come over the Marine Parkway Bridge onto Flatbush Avenue, and it's night. And obviously there's no power, so there's no lights. So, everybody who's out has like their high beams on, and all I see is legs like running in front of me. Like I'm at Flatbush Avenue and Avenue U where the Kings Plaza Mall is, like trying to go up. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, holy shit, sorry. And, the borough's going crazy. There's fires all over the place. And I get in there, and there's not a phone to be in. Like everybody came to work. Like every position was full. George Munch is on the radio. He's giving companies, like 173 was being relocated from Howard Beach, Queens into Brooklyn. He's trying to give them directions to a fire. I forget where it was, somewhere off of like Rutland Road or something. He's make a left here, make it right there. You'll see the school.
Incredible. Go
up 2 blocks, and then like I remember Ladder 10 was transferred from Lower Manhattan to somewhere. And he was telling lefts and rights going down like Church Avenue to wherever this box was, and I know where they are now. At that point, there's a probie. I'm like, I don't even know how to tie my shoes. I can't even get into this place.
Right.
And he's given like stone by stone directions. Step on this curb and the door will open or whatever.
Yeah. That's pretty
So
wild.
I go into the office and not a phone to be answered, not a radio to talk on. So I walk into the back, and that guy, Mike Boucher, who was talking on the radio during the day, he had stayed also. Well, he was also like a cook. So we're on generator power. Well, all the restaurants and supermarkets, everything's closed because there's no power. So he's in the cabinets. He's cooking. There's like, a chicken cutlet here, a hot dog there, a can of soup here so everybody could eat. So there was nothing for me to do. So I washed dishes for like 4.5 hours. There was nothing to do. And then I went to sleep for a little while, and then we ended up having like relief periods because there was no air conditioning in the office. And then 911 had gone down, and the CAD had gone down, and everything was going down. So the computer room where like all the mainframes were, that had air conditioning. So people would do like an hour or so working on the platform and then go into the computer room and cool off for like 15, 20 minutes, and then everybody would rotate through.
Dispatcher rehab.
Yeah, right, exactly. Coffee and air conditioning.
But I think, too, a lot of that goes unnoticed, right? I mean, I know I take for granted the guy on the other end.
Right.
Right? And that has to be, maybe, firefighting is physically demanding and mentally demanding, but I have to think being a dispatcher in a high-paced atmosphere.
Yeah, especially when things go wrong on the other end of the radio. Like, you can't see it, so you've got to hear it, and that's got to be...
It's easy to lose what you're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know when it was. I know I was working in Brooklyn. It was a busy night. What was happening, I have no idea. But the computer went down, and we had like 3 or 4 all hands going, and I was still new. I was probably there like 6 or 8 months, and companies are calling, and I'm answering them, and I'm keeping my cool by speaking clearly and whatever on the radio. But I am like freaking out because one, I have no idea where these companies are, and even up until when I left there in '08, there was no Annie Alley. Like, you couldn't tell where people were calling from because of such antiquated software.
Right.
There was no GPS. There was none of that. It's just, where are you? We're here. Okay, go there. Like,
right.
That's as simple as it could get. Which, hindsight being 2020, I wish they would actually go back to that. I think the GPS-driven CAD systems are not good, but that's a different conversation. But the stress level working in the office, like when things are going down.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of leads into another question too. I mean, I know like on the paperwork you worked the blackout, but you also worked the, or you were in mobile command with the Black Sunday fires.
Yeah. So that was January 23rd. The 22nd, I did my regular 24 in field comm when there was a snowstorm coming in. And we did our 24s backwards, so from night to night. And I was working with this guy, Paul Henderson. He's actually still there. Great guy. He's awesome. So we get out. We had a late run, report of a plane off the runway at JFK. I'll never forget, we were going up the conduit in the snowstorm, and there's Rescue 2 behind us. Like, we're kind of like going back and forth, like they wanted to pass us, but I think Paul wouldn't let them or something. I don't know. Because, the communications van, we're so crucial to the operation that we're not going to let the rescue go by. But whatever.
Can't be last to the
Right.
fire. It doesn't matter what your job is.
Get back from that run, get relieved. I go home. I'm living on 113th Street in Rockaway, Queens, on a beach block. So the next morning, again, buff, I have a scanner. I'm outside shoveling snow. It was like a huge snowstorm. And we had put Field Comm 2 in service, which there's only one Field Comm citywide in New York City. After 9/11, there was a report said that there should be 2. The city said, well, we're not going to spend the money and, budget stuff, blah, blah, blah. Well, they will put Field Comm 2 in service for storms and other, things like that. So I hear on the Manhattan frequency, Field Comm 2 to Manhattan, leaving your frequency, switching to the Bronx. I'm like, oh, they must have a fire. So I put the Bronx on, and it didn't sound good. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I hear all sorts of screaming and yelling. I'm like, okay. So I ran into the house. I told my girlfriend, I'm like, listen, something's not right. I'm going to work. So I jumped in my truck. I went over to Brooklyn to the firehouse. My partner, Paul Henderson, he must have been doing the exact same thing because he showed up too. And at that point, the fire department had gotten 2 new mobile command centers that were Freightliner chassis. They almost look like Winnebagos.
Yeah.
One was from the Leary Firefighters Foundation. They had donated one. And then Councilwoman Provenzano from the Bronx, excuse me, had done and donated the other one. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So they were identical units. And the Provenzano one was in quarters. It wasn't even in service yet. And excuse me. So we ended up taking it, went up to the Bronx, and snow was crazy. It took us a while to get up there. So we parked on the Grand Concourse and, start setting everything up, the radios and everything else. And the command staff comes in, and then Chief Hay, who was the chief of safety at the time, he comes in. At that point, the operation had already concluded. All the bad stuff had already happened. So we were there late in the game. We weren't part of any integral operations or anything. So Chief Hay is in like the conference room in the very back of the rig, and they're counting turns on SCBAs and documenting what was going on, what the personnel had in their pockets, and all this guy's personal stuff that I'm not going to put it all out there because it's that's for the family. But so we're sitting there, and there's a whole side story to this. There's a lieutenant walking around outside, and I didn't even mention this when I talked about this before. Tall, skinny guy, and he's wearing a 53 truck lieutenant's front, which is a slow company out City Island. And so he knocks on the door, walks up, comes in. It's cold out, it's snowing out. And he looks at me, and he looks at my sweatshirt, and he's like, Dewan? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, any relation to Jerry? I'm like, yeah, he was my uncle. Oh, he tells me his name. I forget. I wish I could remember. Turns out this guy was a lieutenant in 293 Engine in Woodhaven years prior when my uncle was doing his rotation through there. And we talked about that and 9/11 and all sorts of stuff. And then he went on his way, and I never heard from him again. But that guy was originally from San Francisco. And they were talking about how, he couldn't get hired in San Francisco, and my uncle couldn't get hired in Boston and all this stuff. And we talked about that. And then,
wild.
Things were going on. And then, get back into the moral of that original story. So we're sitting there, and as a Brooklyn unit, we always keep the Brooklyn radio on in the unit, aside from monitoring all the other millions of frequencies that they have. And my friend Scott Hanratty was working Brooklyn radio, and I hear, and I'm sure you've probably listened to New York City before, if there's, it's work, the dispatcher might give a couple beep beep
Yeah.
before telephone alarm box, whatever. So then we're sitting there and I hear beep beep beep. Telephone alarm, Brooklyn box 1770, Livonia Avenue and Jerome Avenue reporting a fire in a private dwelling. Like, oh, that'll probably be work because Scott's a very, very outstanding dispatcher and, he's on the ball. So then I think 290 get in first and then, 1075, and then the 4-4 gave an all hands and then urgent, we'll get somebody trapped and make it a second alarm and all this other stuff. And we're like, what's going on? And then eventually, phone calls start getting made, and this is what's up, and this is going on here. And then Chief Hay, Chief of Safety, is like, well, okay, can you get me to that fire? So we're like, okay, if he's asking for something, we're going to give it to him. So we packed up operations in the Bronx, and we left in the middle of a snowstorm and drove to the fatal fire in Brooklyn.
Wow.
And then started operations there.
Wow.
And, that was something I never anticipated in a million years ever experiencing. I
don't think anybody does.
No, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Any given Sunday.
Go ahead, Rob.
Is there like I don't think I could prepare myself for that, for doing it. Is there anything like having walked through that or been part of it? Is there any because eventually maybe one of our listeners or somebody out there is going to have to go through that. Is there anything you can like pull away to be like, hey, just this is what I learned from it, or
I wish I could say it was the first time I had to deal with it, but it wasn't.
Right.
Years prior, when I was still in Massachusetts, and I'm kind of like a black cloud in some aspects. I was working EMS day in the city of Worcester, the day of the Worcester cold storage fire, and ended up being there when those 6 guys met their demise at the cold storage factory. So I was an eyewitness to that. Then my own family line of duty with 9/11, and then Black Sunday. So unfortunately for me, this wasn't my first deal with this. I'm like, okay, so kind of you got to do your job. Yeah. Nobody wants to deal with that.
Right.
Obviously, it's still in my head. But when it's going down, do whatever you have to do to keep you cool and worry about it later.
Yeah.
Because it's so much bigger than any of us. I'm nobody. I'm just a guy here telling a story about some things that I happen to see in my life. It's really, not that important. But when it's going down, just do what you got to do. Don't give up. Keep pushing through. And, when relief is in and you go home, then you deal with whatever it is you got to deal with.
Yeah, and that's become a big to do as well now. Protecting ourselves outside of the job too, and that's it. That's that is we have a lot of friends in that mental health game and so on that we've become friends with along the line with National Fire Radio, and that's something that we're going to hit on another time in place because that deserves a lot of attention. But I have to think nobody's ever prepared for anything like that.
Oh God, no.
And you're absolutely right. And professionalism always carries us through, and realizing that we would want somebody there for us just like we're there for them.
Right.
I mean, that's it. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, it doesn't get much more clearer than that. But all right, so New York City, man. All right, we hit on a lot of city, but now you're a fireman down in Baltimore City.
Yeah.
Right. So you have medical issues in the city. You end up doing dispatching for a bunch of years out of the communications office, right?
In which?
In New York City, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So then it was time. You said, "Screw this, man! I don't want to be behind the mic. I want to get on the front line."
Yeah, I mean, being in the field comm was amazing, and getting to work with awesome guys. But like the ongoing joke I have with one of my buddies is that every time I went to a fire in the field comm, it was that much closer to not crawling down a hallway.
Right.
And you're like, well, this is not. It's like the ultimate tease, if you will. To
no, you're right.
Kind of politely.
No, I get it.
But so I've met guys in different places, and I actually, this is terrible, I quit the New York City Fire Department twice. So there's that. The first time, both in communications. First time I had gotten hired in Montgomery County, Maryland, and went through Fire Academy there, and ended up with a septic staph infection in my leg that went all the way to my heart. So I ended up not going through and staying there, and I went back to New York City.
Wow.
And then the second time I quit New York City, terrible. I went back to Massachusetts, where I was illegally living, which doesn't matter now. I don't work there anymore. Living outside because I was using someone's address. I went through paramedic school for free, so that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
That's an expensive program. So I was like, well, if I'm going to advance my career, I have to go get my paramedic. And so I resigned from New York, and I went back to Mass and got my paramedic, and made a bunch of more friends and made other connections. and had met guys from Baltimore between funerals and St. Patty's days and all the typical functions. And hey, Baltimore's giving a test. Why don't you come on down? All right, why not? So now I'm in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And what a ride! Some of the after having the privilege to work in so many different places and meeting so many different people, some of the best firemen I've ever had the privilege to be exposed to, work next to, learn from, like on all different levels. Guys who. There's a book out there called The Accidental Fireman. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Absolutely.
Guy, I think he was like a banker or something, and just happened to get into the fire department. Well, I kind of relate that to some of the guys I work with in Baltimore. That they grew up in the city, they knew nothing about the fire department. Someone said, "Hey, go take this test." Okay, and they got on the fire department, and now they're like the salt of the earth, like great firemen.
Right.
People who, and for me, it's different because I have this huge privilege that I grew up in a fire department family. So I have all this information bouncing around inside my head about what went on in 1900, 79 years before I was even a thought. Right. And, stuff, again, it's not really useful, but it's nice to know and understanding where we came from as to why we're going to the direction.
Picture, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it lays the groundwork.
Right.
So, yeah.
So like, for me, I'm obviously a very unique individual, but putting it lightly, never. But like, I'll talk with guys who, they're first generation, and they don't know anything about, they didn't even know if Baltimore had fireboxes. They don't even know what a box is, other than the terminology that when they say box alarm, they know that they're going to go to a fire. They know that the box area is within the map book of, the first engine company's district. It's, like I'm at Truck 12, Squad 40 is the engine essentially that's in quarters with us. So we're in a 40 box. So, yep, okay, we're going to a 40 box. Okay, or we're going to a 29 box. That's the neighboring company. They don't know that box came from, a red firebox in the corner 150 years ago, and tapping out bell signals. Right. They're like, "What's a bell signal?"
Right.
Yeah. And it's not even important that they know it because it has no effect on them doing their job correctly. But it's just that back information.
I think there's
how into the job are you?
Culture, yeah, you want them to be into the job, and
that's
part of it.
But there's guys. Listen, there's a lot of different levels of guys. So there's guys that are absolutely into the job when they're at the job, but then when they go home, they turn it off.
Yeah,
and
that's okay too.
And they're 100 miles an hour. Like, not everybody wants to do National Fire Radio. Right? Not everybody wants to talk about firefighting 24 hours a day.
On their day off.
I know a lot of great firemen.
Get up early on a Sunday?
And drive 4 hours.
You know what I'm saying? Like, there's different cuts. And so, like, I don't take it away from anybody. Like, it's just a burning passion in my heart. And that's why I do this, and that's why I like doing this.
Yeah.
But there's other guys that are fantastic firemen that go home at the end of the day and they're like,
and that's totally fine.
Absolutely.
And you know what? They probably living a better life for us.
They probably are. They probably are. But sometimes we get too caught up in it, I think. But anyway, so all right. So
Baltimore, there's a huge company right in the center of town, and then you have other companies outside.
Where Rescue One is, right? Is that?
Oh, it's Stedman Station.
Stedman Station.
So,
and how did that combine into one? Because that wasn't. They weren't all there.
No, that opened I think in '72. Okay. I may have my dates wrong. I'm sure someone can correct me.
They will. There's tons of correction.
I'm sure the Facebook Fire Department will be all over it.
We actually have a division of National Fire Radio out there that's into grammar and spelling as well.
Okay, excellent. They have a field day with me.
They're going to strike the box here in a minute.
Right.
When a president does a State of the Union address, and then at the end, all the news channels do fact finding.
Yeah, right.
We get that on every single piece of content we do because we're always wrong and the world is always right, and so I love being fact checked all the time.
Ironically, we're all married, so we're used to it.
Fact.
Not me, Rob. I mean, my wife's cool. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, all right.
So back to the fire department.
So let's talk about Baltimore. I mean, because I don't know any being a Northeast guy. Like that's Mid-Atlantic, right?
And I didn't either.
Yeah.
I knew that the Baltimore Orioles were a thing, and I never really even heard of the Ravens until I started going down there. And it's not a dig; it's just that when you're in New England, like if you're not playing hockey or whatever other sport or being involved in the fire department in that particular circle, like the earth ends at like the Jersey Turnpike, unless you're going to Florida.
Well, for us in the Northeast, I mean that's very, very true in a way. So
it's like I've heard of LA, but I've never been there.
Right.
So. After meeting guys and saying, "Hey, come to Baltimore," I'm like, oh, "Okay, sure," and I knew nothing about it. So I went on the interweb and started looking stuff up. I'm like, "Oh, okay, wow, they catch a lot of work down there." No concept, none. So I went down, took the test, and I was like 185 on the list, so I got hired as like the second or third class because they were doing like classes of 50-ish. And got hired March 30th of 11, went through the fire academy. Summer was really hot, and I'm fat and from the north, so I don't like heat. Because, let's face it, I talk about the sun, I get burnt.
Yeah, I get it.
So that was painful. But graduated the fire academy, went to Truck 23 in Pigtown. Shout out to them. That's an amazing house. The 3rd Battalion in general, all the companies in Baltimore are awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, and we had this conversation briefly too about, the best firehouse in the world is every firehouse.
Right.
Doesn't matter which department you're working for. It's whatever you make out of it.
That's right.
So I went to Truck 23, and I had a captain named Bryant Crone, who was a legend in that area, during his career. He's now retired. And my first lieutenant, this guy, Jeff Walsh, who became a very, very good friend, both professionally and personally. They taught me how Baltimore does things. And when I first went there, I was like, you know what? It's difficult for me because I've been in other places, and the things that I have bouncing around in my brain, I have to try to erase that because I'm not in Boston. I'm not in New York City. I'm not in Central Mass. I am in Baltimore. I need to do things the Baltimore way because if I don't do my job the way they want me to do it, something could go drastically wrong.
Right.
No, I think somebody asked before about being on, and then put up a question, they're going to be on probation.
Sidian?
One of our viewers is going to be on probation or starting, and that's an excellent point.
Oh, okay, sure.
If you have that knowledge beforehand, keep it tucked away, but learn how to do it from that department's point of view.
And
you're going to have to do your job.
My lieutenant, Jeff Walsh, after we got to know each other more, he'd break my balls. He goes, I didn't even have to train you with this stuff. Why'd you waste my time? I'm like, Lieutenant, I never worked in Baltimore before. I don't know any of this stuff. Do I know how to put a ladder up? Sure. Everybody learns how to do that, but there's ways that Baltimore does things.
Yeah.
And you need to do it their way.
Sure.
They've been doing it correctly for 150 something years now.
Right.
There's nothing on fire unless somebody's actually setting it. So all the fires go out in Baltimore. Even the great one went out.
Yep.
So they're not doing it wrong.
No, you're absolutely right.
So and that's like every department. Everybody has their own individual tactics.
But I think that's important too because relate that to everyday, whether volunteer or career. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why we do things the way we do it.
Yeah.
Not always is it maybe the best or most efficient or right way, but it's the way we do it.
Right.
And that's part of the culture. That's part of learning, right? Sometimes you got to check it at the door. Mm-hmm. You learn the way of the land, and that's how we do it.
Right.
Well, you go through these academies, and then you come back, and then you're kind of retaught, but you have the basics.
Yeah.
And that's what it is almost everywhere.
And Baltimore is a very uncomplicated city in its firefighting procedures, if you will, in the fact that if you look at a picture of a fire in a 3-story dwelling in 1902 and a picture of a fire in a 3-story dwelling yesterday, it's basically the same tactics.
Right.
But because it's the same building. So it hasn't really changed a whole lot. And that's where you get the difference between legacy construction in the city and this new lightweight stuff out in the county, quote unquote. And, you'll always hear, the county don't do this and the city does that. Well, yeah, but it's not the same.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that, the county fireman's a bad fireman, the city fireman's, it has nothing to do with that. It's just that if you're going to a fire in a 3-story brick row home with a flat roof, well, that's a very different than going to a fire in a 3-story McMansion with lightweight truss construction that was built 6 months ago.
Absolutely.
You can't really compare the two.
Right. So let's talk about Baltimore because I don't know much about it. Breakdown, engines, trucks, size of the city.
You know what? This is going to be one of your fact checks.
I don't need the exact numbers, but I'm curious how big of a city it is.
Terminology of because
different stuff. So they call their hydrants plugs. A lot of places don't call them that; they just call them hydrant. About 30. I'm trying to think, it's 37 engines. We've had some changes. There used to be 4 squads. Now there's 3. We've had some company closures. Even in the very short time that I've been there, I've only been there since 11, and they closed Truck 15 on the east side, and they closed Squad 11. There was some changes in the SOC program.
Yeah.
It was good.
You're
it was
talking
bad.
30-something engine companies.
Yeah, 17 trucks, 6 battalions.
Okay. What do you get on initial box alarm for reported fire?
Generally, and the rescue one is the dangler because it depends on where in the city.
Is that citywide? There's one. Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, there is one heavy rescue for the entire city,
right.
And they take a ton more boxes than they used to. But even their response policy has changed a little bit, and that's another conversation. But 5 engines, 2 trucks, 2 battalions, and a medic unit.
Well, that's pretty heavy.
So the 3rd engine is RIT. And the culture in Baltimore, And it's something that I hadn't really experienced being in the Northeast because, again, it's just different.
Yep.
Very fast. Very, very fast. And the guys there are amazing.
That's
guys
awesome.
who you wouldn't think, the 62-year-old senior man who needs, to get up out of the recliner with using both hands and on his hands and knees is like an Olympic sprinter going to the fire truck. And before drive cam came into play, which was kind of a game changer for a little while because, punitive measures and all that sort of stuff. You go into most firehouses and the turnout gear of the people who were working was not on the floor. It was inside. They call it the wagon. I'd never really heard that until I went down there, but in the wagon, so that way they could get out the door faster, and they get dressed on the way, which was awesome. It's all about competition and being prideful of your company. Every department has pride in its company, but it's at a different level there. And what an amazing job they do. You can tell by the Instagrams you get the 8 engine and 10 truck or 13 engine, 16 truck. Their marketing game is on point. Their social media game is on point. They're excellent people. They're very good firemen. They have experience from other places that they can bring in and make their own to make it work in Baltimore.
Jack, I'm so glad you hit on that, brother, because that to me is so important right now. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about building culture and really sell. Everybody, you got to sell these days.
Yeah.
You got to sell yourself. You got to sell your services. You got to sell your worth. And these guys, there's pages out there, man, that these guys are doing it right. They understand the value of social media versus the downfall of social media. When it's done right, and you have a fire department or a firehouse full of culture and tradition, and that's what drives them, and they have squared away guys, man, social media explodes for these guys.
Absolutely.
And it makes you want to be a part of that.
And like you said, they understand the responsibility of it too.
Absolutely.
So that's
right.
It's a win.
And there's
a home run.
And there's a lot of things that have to do with the social media aspect that we could get in a lot of trouble with that too.
Of course. No doubt.
Every agency has their social media policies, and let's face it, I'm just as guilty. Here we are on live national fire radio, and I'm putting myself out there. But anyway, there's ways to do it. There's ways to do it tactfully. Those guys have got some amazing content. They get a ton of work. It's undeniable.
Right.
And there's other companies in the city who are also doing it. It's just that they don't really market their brand, if you will.
Yeah, but I think for the city of Baltimore, you're going to get the cream of the crop people that want to go work there. You're going to get guys that are into the fire service that want to go work there because they get to see what you guys are doing firsthand.
Yeah.
And the aspect of how good you are. And that's what I get out of it, right? Like, I look at quality. We get pictures and videos sent to us all the time. We talk to guys all over the country. Some of the stuff we get, we're like, yeah, it's great. Good job. You guys, you're doing great. There's other departments you look at or other companies, you're like, damn. I'm like, these guys get it. They're squared away. They go to work. Like, that to me is the best selling point there is. And you're gonna develop a culture where you're gonna get the best of the best,
right? Because
that's what you're demanding.
And I think that's where every firehouse breaks balls.
Of course.
That's the culture, one way or another, about whatever the topic is of the minute, because it's going to change when someone else screws something up 10 minutes from now. But the marketing game that, companies like, 8 and 10 and 13 and 16 and, not really so much up where I'm in the 5th because we don't really have a lot of it. But those guys putting the content out there and showing what work is being done is also beneficial at the political level.
Yes.
Because, city wants to talk about company closures. Really? Well, look at these fire companies just did this, and this, and they're showing this much productivity because, unfortunately, the fire department model is different than the business model.
I get
They're
it.
not even closely related.
Right.
But when you have the social media aspect and these guys are out there and showing, hey, we have this productivity, well, maybe we really need them.
Well,
no kidding.
The other thing is that you watch the videos from 8x10, and and what's the other one that's what's there? So you have 8x10. Who's
and 13 engine and 16 truck up the street on McMecken.
Right, and you look at these guys, if you listen to the sound, and one of the things I like to do sometimes is just close my eyes and listen to the video.
Yep.
You can actually hear that they're not just excited to go to a fire; they care about the citizens.
Yeah,
they're talking to them. They're like, "Hey, get out of the way! Come on, stay out of the building. We'll take care of it.
Right.
We got it." And it's most of the time, I've seen people just blow right past people and not even.
Of course.
We're going to a fire, out the way, Jack, and they're pushing them off to the side. These guys actually care about the city.
And you can't have a job in an area like that and not care.
Yeah.
We can all sit here and, chest beat and talk about whatever, but you have to care about what you're doing. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
That's right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No doubt. No doubt. All right, so the makeup of Baltimore, we got it. I'm just trying to keep us on track here. So let's talk about your position. You are on Instagram known as the Irish Tillerman.
Yes.
I get the Irish part too. I get the Tillerman part. But how did you get there? How'd you get to the truck? How'd you get to...
My father was a truckman the majority of his career. He was a Tillerman most of his career. So all kids who grew up with a father as a fireman want to be just like their father.
Yep.
And I've wanted, to get in that tiller cab for as long as I can remember what it is.
Doesn't every fireman, though?
Of course. I mean, it's like...
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Real ladder trucks bend in the middle.
Right.
End of
They have
story.
two steering wheels. Right. It's the most fun you can have with your clothes on.
Yeah.
Just follow the guy in front of you.
Right. You never get lost.
No, that's very
Which, now that I'm driving all the time, I'm like, oh, now I got to learn this district, really? So went to 23 truck out of the fire academy, and I was fortunate enough to go to a tiller truck, and
a lot of tillers in Baltimore.
most of them are.
Yeah.
Truck 26 on the east side is a rear mount. Truck 1 is a rear mount, and I think they're the only ones. They're the only.
Do you guys have a snorkel still?
Yes.
Okay.
So the snorkel. And again, this will be fact checked because something's probably going to get wrong with this. But anyway, the snorkel is at Truck 1 at Old Town, along with the Pierce mid-mount tower that they bought.
Yeah.
So that's Tower 81. The snorkel, I think, has 51 on the side now. I forget. Anyway. But generally, Truck 1 would always be responsible for the water tower is what they use for their jargon. And generally, third alarms, Truck 1 would take the snorkel. But with all the budget cuts over the years, Truck 1's like fourth due to half the city. So, I mean, they might be on it already, and someone else will have to go get it. Truck 1 runs a lot. They're very busy. So now we've got backup companies. So like where I am at Truck 12 up in the northwest, and then Truck 30 way over in the northeast, we're now backups for the tower. So if Truck 1's on something and the tower needs to get sent, they'll have one of it, which it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because if you want me to go from Liberty Heights and Garrison all the way to Old Town to pick up a truck to then drive somewhere else, like it's going to be an hour before you get there, but I don't make the decisions.
Right. So they do it.
Yeah. So
Right.
left Truck 23. I was invited to go to Rescue 1, so I went there. Had a blast, time of my life. The guys who I was working there on that shift, on D shift, I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my life working at Stedman.
Pretty young fireman to be
Yeah.
on a rescue company.
Never anticipated anything like that happening. Was extremely excited to go there. I was only there a year, and then we have an open competitive promotional process for pump operators if you're an engine, or emergency vehicle drivers if you're in the truck or the rescue. So I took the EVD exam, and one of the big selling points for taking those promotional exams in Baltimore is that if you're an EMT firefighter or a paramedic firefighter, you have to take medic unit details. So, when we were on the old schedule doing the days and nights, if what they called your bucket, like your hours of medic time, was low, you might get detailed to the medic both day works and the night work. And then the second night work, you'd be back in suppression, but you'd probably be detailed out.
And it's a rough city to work EMS.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not like it's there's your slew of EMS calls, but there's a lot of other.
Yeah, but I mean,
stuff.
the personnel who ride the medic unit full time. I mean, like some of the busiest medic units in the nation.
Yeah.
I think like Medic 21 and Medic 15 and these company Medic 1, they're taking like over 7,000 runs. So it's constant, and they're still working the days and nights. They're not doing 24s, which I don't blame them. But bless you. So
Thank you.
I was at Rescue 1 for a year, and then I promoted to EVD. And because I was at Rescue 1, the SOC program was kind of like being reborn again, if you will, for lack of a better term. So Truck 6 down at Locust Point was the only SOC ladder company, and there was an opening, so they sent me there. And that's where I was when I had my spinal cord injury, and I was out for a while. And that's still something that I'm fighting with, but, I'm back full duty, so, I'm glad to go to fires again. But
you were out for quite some time.
Yeah, on several occasions. On September 18th of 14, gorgeous day out. We just left Stedman. We were doing a high-angle pickoff drill in the basement with Rescue 1. Rescue took a second alarm in a church somewhere up in the northeast. So we went back in service, coming down Light Street, crossing Pratt, like towards the Inner Harbor. We were taking a 10-cent car accident. And there's a big dip in the roadway there. And I'm in the tiller cab, and all of a sudden I saw the tractor make the big dip, and I went, oh, no. And seatbelt tensioner in the truck failed. So I felt the seatbelt going bzzz over my lap, went up, hit the roof of the tiller cab, bounced off the seat, hit my head again, ended up at shock trauma. I have spinal cord compression at C3. I have herniated and bulging discs at C3, C4, C5, C6, C6, C7, L4, L5, L5, S1.
It's like Battleship, man.
Yeah, right. These definitely sunk my battleship. So, like, this time's like I can't feel my fingers. I can't feel my feet. When I lay down flat, my arms and legs go numb. Sometimes I've got balance issues. For a while, so I was out of work for like 5 months when it first happened. And when I went back to work, I went back to 6, and it's a slow company. So it was kind of like an easier transition, if you will.
Easier back in.
Like I was in a go-get-em company that was going to 3 fires a night. So, but you'd still get the occasional fire. It wasn't like we didn't do anything.
Right.
So, 2 o'clock in the morning, a box would come in, and I go to get up out of the bunk, and I go to run towards the till cab, and it looked like I needed a V8. Like I'm falling over, like I'm trying to hold on to the truck, like I'm falling over, putting my
Wasn't
turnout
that the
pants
way
on.
you're supposed to drive them?
Pretty
hanging
much,
out the
yeah.
window?
Right, yeah. Well, and you know what? In that truck, the design of it was so poor. 6, 23, 29, who's the other one? And 20. The tiller cab was lowered like 18 inches. So all you're looking at is rungs and the stanchions, like where the turntable is, and they're sliding doors, fortunately. But I'm not going to down Pierce, but their tiller cab designs is not that great with those sliding doors, where the doors would get broken. But I would have to till like Ace Ventura, so I'd have like one leg like out the door, one hand in the center, hold it so I could go and look like this. I'll never forget the first time I tilled that truck when it was brand new. We were taking some 10-cent run, and we made a right off of Ford Avenue onto South Charles Street, and I see the tractor go to the left, so I turn to the left a little bit, bring the trailer over. Never knew it. As we went past the corner, I saw these 4 little white helmets in the street. It was the gas company, and I missed them by about that much. Never even knew they were there, and those all the visibility was so poor that I'm like, oh, this is a little bit of a different ballgame. The Seagraves have great visibility. The LTIs that they had before, they weren't bad.
You're sticking up above a lot with those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had bought these trucks with the lower tiller cabs to try to fit them in all the stations, because there was some height restrictions that where, transfer companies going somewhere else, they go to back end and then they crush the tiller cab. Oops. So they try to get that whole universal spec. And
now there's like a centering thing on the cab, right, that you can see.
a lot of places do different things. So like ours, we've got, they call it a boat light. So if you line up the knuckle of the steering wheel with the boat light, you're straight.
We have the AC unit in Hyattsville and Seagraves, as long as you put that in the center of your back center.
I mean, you can do so many things. Like I saw, I don't know if it was on your page. Maybe it was your page. I think somebody tagged me in it. Some company had put like a collapsible boat light, but it was collapsing the other way. I mean, there's all sorts of different things you could do. I mean, you could just take a DOT marker light and put it in the center of the light bar on the front.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to really get too technical with it. But yeah, that's it.
Well, that just about wraps it up.
Right.
Well, so one thing I wanted to talk about with the injury though is like for guys that are out there and stuff.
Yep.
If you do get injured, like how important it is just like kind of like one like always know that like there's this brotherhood in the fire service, but it's also important to take care of yourself, because you don't want to get jammed up where.
So we're so resistant to change. Nothing new.
Right.
It's not 1970 anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If you get hurt, you gotta say something, because unfortunately, and my chief in the 5th Battalion, this guy's name is John Ellis, amazing fireman, combat Marine, very squared away guy. Him and I had a pretty good conversation one day, and I was actually in the process of being pensioned last summer because I had another complication from my neck and some things were going on, and so he's like, you got to do for you. He goes, you got to report it. He goes, and he was working when this guy Eric Schaefer was killed at the Clipper Mill in Rescue 1. I think it was like 96. I'm sure I might be incorrect on that, but anyway, he was saying he was a fireman at Truck 3 at the time, the chief was, and he goes, when Eric Schaefer was killed, he goes, a senior guy said to him, if you get killed in this job, the first thing that's going to happen is that someone downtown is going to take a piece of paper, and they're going to take their pencil and flip it over, and they're going to erase your name. They're going to wipe off the rubber, and they're going to write someone else's name in. That's what you mean to this city. And I was like, wow. Okay. I mean, and I kind of knew that already after having experiencing so much other stuff, in my personal life and professional life and everything. But it was like, that was that sobering. Okay. I am just a number. So it's the point where you need to take care of yourself. And if there's guys out there, and there's tons of stories, guys in the 70s, my ear, I got long lobes because I got burnt and I went back to work and, my knees are burnt up, but I just wrapped them up. You can't do that stuff anymore because now it's all about liability.
Yep.
Who's wrong, who's doing what, are you going to get care? If you didn't report it, now it gets worse. And then now you have to go off because like you've got something that's gangrenous after a burn. Well, now it's not line of duty because you didn't report it in the right time. You gotta report it. It's, people might break your balls and, hey, you're a whatever and, you're weak and this and that. But you know what? They're not paying your bills.
Right. They're not paying your mortgage.
Let me tell you how many guys were paying my bills when I was out, when I was losing my house. Yeah. I've got a couple of really good core friends. That Lieutenant Walsh like I was talking about, this kid Chris Matz, who's at 27 truck now. He was a Proby school classmate of mine. My other buddy James. Like when I was out, this other guy Tommy Altieri. When I was out and I had my neck injury, I was in the process of doing my basement over. And actually another county guy, Jason Cromer from Baltimore County. They were at my house 3 days a week, helping me. They were doing most of it. Putting down tile, running electrical, doing sheetrock and stuff. You'll have guys that are helping you, but let's face it, how many guys are paying your bills? There's a kid right now, Shane Horn, he's an EVD at Truck 23, probably didn't make the news up here. Poor kid was putting Christmas lights up at his house. It was on a ladder and fell, and he's now paralyzed from the waist down. Wow. I'm 39, so he might be like 32, 3, 4, somewhere in there. Newly married, and now he's looking at the rest of us from the belt buckle line up.
Wow.
Young kid, good fireman. So you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah, and I think, Jack, you're absolutely right. I mean, the other thing too is, 20, 25, 30-year career, your body takes a beating. And, you got to make sure you're protected and covered because when you retire and you're supposed to have the glory years of retirement, enjoying your kids, your grandkids, and enjoying life.
You want to be able
but you can't, right? I mean, that's something to really think about. I mean, it is a career, it's a passion, it's a brotherhood, it's all of that. But it's also, you got to make sure you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, and I know like firsthand too, is a lot of times we put everything else before ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's just inherently who firefighters are, right? Like, we always look out for the other guy first, and then we worry about ourselves later. I know so many guys that struggle personally, but they're the first guy to give you the shirt off their back.
Absolutely.
And so, at some point, though, we need to make sure that we take care of each other. And that's part of that conversation we have here quite often, where we hope we can instill those values into the people that might not, are coming in without knowing that's how it is, right? We were talking about it before. Guys go home, they turn it off. Like, are they in tuned enough to know that, we need to step up and take care of each other, too?
Right.
I mean, that's something that, you have to, you pray that we teach these guys correctly, that.
And to compound upon that, like that's something I look at with my father, and we never even got to talk about that before. So my father and I have pretty much the same injuries in our neck and back. He was a tillman most of his career. So he ended up, I'm trying to think, I was working in New York at the time, and he went from the busiest truck company to the slowest engine. He had like 27, 8, 9 years in. And he had serious neck and back injuries from being in the tiller cab most of his career, and he had peripheral neuropathy, which normally is associated with diabetes. Well, he wasn't diabetic, but had some surgeries done. Things weren't going right. Ended up having a spinal cord stimulator implant device put in, which his body rejected, which was a whole big issue with. He got a septic staph infection in a spinal cord. Was out of work and they have accrued sick time, whereas like Baltimore we don't. It's a different setup, but typical, old school fireman that, he tapped out sick maybe 3 times his whole career. Right. Showed up to work sick, work hurt, that whole old mantra from, back in the day. And so the job didn't know what was going on. And he was out sick, and he was running out of sick time. But he had these major surgeries. He had a spinal cord problem. He had infections and so on. And he was able to make it back to work. It was very difficult for him to get back to work. And then when he finally was able to retire with his full 80% pension, he's like, he was in so much pain, and the medications he was on, making him drowsy, and all that stuff that goes along with that, and he had to turn in his driver's license. Yeah. So it's like when this all happened to me, I saw what my poor father went through, and it's like, ooh, am I going to end up like that? And he got cut on. He had surgeries. I didn't.
Yeah. And
that was a very difficult decision to make, because it's always 50-50. But once they cut you, it's like throwing a baseball. That's it. But the surgery will either be a success or it won't. I was like, well, I don't think it's probably a good idea for me to get cut on. So I just deal with it.
Yeah.
But now I see, as a retiree, how difficult it is for him, because had he not had those problems, he would have stayed till he was 65. Right out the door. I mean, he got on and he was 22, I think he got on, because he got on in 75. So he would have stayed till he was 65. He would have had like 40-something years in the fire department. His father had 44 years, and my great-grandfather had like 44 years. That was just that whole, you stay till you can't anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was him too. But he was man enough to admit, well, my body can't do this anymore, and if I keep doing this, I'm going to get someone else hurt.
Yeah.
So he, very hard decision to make that a lot of guys are too proud to make, but he made it. Kudos to him. That's a hard decision to make, and that was that.
Yeah. So how long were you off the job then on injury?
The first time, September through New Year's. So what's that? October, November, December. So called just under 5 months, and then I had transferred out of 6 to go up to 12 to try to get a little bit more fire duty. And in October of last year, we were just leaving Old Town after like a training, and we're going up 83 to get off at Druid Park to go back to the firehouse. And I'm driving, and I had this hot burning pain that went down from basically my hairline to my butt crack, and I couldn't feel the steering wheel and I couldn't feel the pedals. And I'm doing 70 miles an hour on a tractor trailer. So I looked at the lieutenant, and I was like, hey, man, I'm like, something's not right. I'm like, I'll get you back to the firehouse, but I got to go off, with my neck. And ended up having more CT scans, X-rays, MRIs. Ended up having a CT myelogram done. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, where I basically got a spinal tap, and they injected dye into my spinal cord, which was the most excruciating thing I've ever dealt with in my life. I don't recommend it. And that's where, and this was, 4 years later, and that's when they finally figured out that I had cord compression at C3. And, but they didn't know that right away. Like they have to, do films and live floor and all this other stuff. So I got out of the firehouse. This was in February, like on a Monday morning. I went and had the procedure done, and I had my 5 days off because that's the way our schedule rotates. So I'm back to work the following Saturday. And I was still in a little bit of pain, but I'm like, all right, whatever. So a month went by, and I get a phone call. I'm working in the firehouse. And, hi, this is Nancy Nurse from Neurology Practice XYZ. Hi, what can I do for you? We'd like to discuss the results of your CT myelogram. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I'm at work right now. I get out tomorrow morning. And like you could hear her, like the silence over the phone, and all of a sudden she's like, you're working? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, you shouldn't be working. I'm like, well, I'm going to finish my 24. Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow. And the next morning, I had to bang out of my part-time job because we've all got a bunch of different jobs. And I drove out to Hagerstown, Maryland, which is like, an hour and a half west of the city, and sat down with this doctor, and he's like, nope. You're all done. You can't do this. And I'm like, oh, well, that escalated quickly. So called up the firehouse, we call it a PSI slip for the public safety infirmary, had to go off. And then more court cases and, lawyers and doctors and all this other stuff. And my wife and I had done a projection because I was working like 4 jobs.
Right.
Well, now I'm out injured, sick, injured, whatever they were classifying it as, which is a completely different legal conversation. And you can't go to work your other jobs. It's workers' comp fraud.
Right.
So savings went down, checking went down, credit cards went up, did a projection. At what point will we no longer be able to pay our bills?
Right.
So we figured out that June 1st, we would be late on the mortgage. So we're like, all right, how are we going to do this? So we mulled around with it for like a week. What are we going to do? A girl that I work with at my part-time job, her boyfriend was a builder. Hey, I know a bunch of real estate agents. Your house is in a hot market, blah, blah, blah. All right. Gave the guy a call. Sold my house. Like, it never even went on the market.
Yeah.
He's like, I have 2 buyers for your house right now. I'm like, oh, okay. So my parents being retired, living in Florida, they had a huge house that they could put up my family of 5. So we're like, well, there's no residency restriction in Baltimore. If you want to live in Oregon, they don't care. Like you can show up to work on time. It's fine.
Yeah.
So I had that going for me. So we sold the house, even though I didn't want to, but I'd rather make money on it than get foreclosed on. So sold the house, moved to Florida with my parents temporarily. I was flying back and forth for court cases and, oh my God. But I wasn't paying a mortgage. Right. So, the one paycheck I was getting from the fire department, we were able to survive on with, the car payments and cell phones and insurance and, all that other stuff, diapers. And had another meeting with a different attorney. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, what do you mean, what do I want to do? I want to go back to work. He goes, okay. Now, digress a little bit. I got a letter in the mail. City Fire Department Human Resources says you have termination of non-line of duty medical leave effective July 21st. And this was like 4th of July weekend. I'm like, non-line of duty? What? What are you talking about?
Right.
So I call up my old captain from my old house because he was intimately familiar with what was going on. Talked to him, talked to the union president, talked to a couple other guys. And they were like, you need to get up here quick and do some stuff. I'm like, okay. So I drove up. Took forever because it was 4th of July weekend driving from Cape Coral, Florida to Baltimore. Don't ever do that. Horrible idea.
Hard no on that one.
Right. So met with a couple of different doctors and a lawyer. And the lawyer of all people, he sat me down and explained Maryland case law and why it's non-line of duty. Turns out there's this rule on the books from like a million years ago that if your injury is older than 2 years, it's no longer valid. And I went back to work full duty. So you're fine. Because then it's, well, how do we know that you didn't, run into the catcher playing softball? You know what I mean? Or get hit by a bus at the corner of walk and don't walk.
So what? So all right. I'm looking.
Yep.
So where are we? I mean, what?
So after all that was said and done, this lawyer was like, well, here's the deal. He goes, I'm not a doctor, but I deal with broken firemen all the time. He goes, you want to go back to work, right? I said, yeah. He says, in the time that you came back from your original injury, and you have all these problems and blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah. He's like, how many more times did you hit your head in the tiller cab? I'm like, I don't know, it happens all the time. It's a tiller truck. We all hit our heads all the time. He goes, and how many times did you pull a ceiling down and hit you in the head? I'm like, I'm in a truck. It happens all the time.
Every day.
Every fire.
He goes, and how many times did you break your neck and die? And I'm like, never. He goes, right. He goes, so from an outsider standpoint, the odds of you breaking your neck and dying are the same as everybody else. It's 50-50. Either it happens or it doesn't. I'm like, okay, I can dig that. He goes, so you want to go back to work? I said, yeah. He goes, call your doctor right now. Tell him you want to get another evaluation and to clear you for full duty, and we'll fight to make it happen. Okay. So I called up the doctor, went through, did that whole thing, had a whole bunch of other meetings with people, and they put me through a functional capacity evaluation. Did fine, and went back to work. And then I commuted from Florida to Baltimore for like 5 months. Southwest Airlines made a ton of money off of me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Made it back, and that was like a huge undertaking and stress, and you know how guys are. Oh, this bum don't come to work. Blah blah blah. It's like, no, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah. So I mean,
I think that's always one of the things that upsets me about the fire service is that when brothers and sisters get hurt, you don't know the pain they're going through because you're not experiencing it yourself.
Yeah.
You yourself, as the injured person, would never want that pain to anybody.
Right.
But because you're not there, all of a sudden, and I don't know where it comes from, and I don't know if it's a thing with management, but it's like they want to throw you out almost, like trash. Like, hey,
you're expendable.
This is no good anymore. We gotta get rid of it.
Right.
And that's really because, like, especially things like back injuries,
And they're so complicated.
Right, and you can't somebody could look at you and be like, well, he just looks like he's sitting there, like he's fine, like he's just not happy about the the Red Sox or something, and it's like, no, he's in pain, and like, because I have a lieutenant who's out on injury, and every now and then, like, I remember one of the most embarrassing things for him was at a dinner, he inadvertently spilled everybody's drinks on the table.
Oh wow!
Because he had that spasm come through, and that pain, that shot of pain came up, and the arm just went out like that to grip the table to hold on.
Yep.
And then you have administration being like, "Whoa, he's costing me a position." And I've always.
So I mean, the bean counter perspective, I get it, but it's like the personal avenue. It's like, well,
you're still a human,
right?
Right. Like,
yeah.
So where are you now?
Well, I'm hanging out here with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, but you're back on the line.
Yes.
Where you want to be.
Yeah, back to work. I still deal with the things I got to deal with. I still get neck pain, I get headaches and whatever, but just deal with it. I'd much rather deal with that and be able to go to work than be sitting at home bored to tears with, watching the same shows over and over again.
Yeah. I just, getting your story today and hearing where you've come from, where you've been, where you're going.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you were born to do this. I mean, there's no way around that. So it's you can show up and go to work because that's not what your job is, but it's your passion, right? I
mean, that's what drives me. I mean, how many people out there love going to work every day? Yeah. We can all bitch, I don't want to go to work tomorrow, but I still want to go to work tomorrow.
Yeah. So I think just before we wrap up, because we were going for almost an hour and a half here, the last thing I just wanted to touch on was that you worked in a pretty decent event. I mean, some would say it was an incident that was noteworthy. The Baltimore riots, back in 2015. Like, did you come, because I know a lot of the country watched that on the news, and they got a different perspective that was fed to them. But I mean, for you being in the city, and Baltimore firefighters love the city, they love the people that work there, or that live there rather. They serve and protect. So you had to have felt that coming up. That was. Yeah. I know driving through, I felt it. I would stop at Chaps Pit Beef or something like that from Monrovia Road there, and, and the people were just angry. So what was it for you from your end and the day of?
So that was my regular 24.
Okay.
That was, I'm trying to think, was it a Monday? I forget what day of the week it was. There was a baseball game. Actually, the Red Sox were playing the Orioles. That was so that was, I think, Saturday. And there was some uprising around Camden Yards, and they were trying to blame it on the Red Sox fans and whatever. And then the day of Freddie Gray's funeral, that's when everything popped off. So I was down 6 truck at the time, very slow company, and we were actually out on a medic run down at a pier doing a pickoff off of an ocean-going salt freighter, high ropes, all this stuff. So we're calling for Rescue 1 for ropes, and they're like, yeah, Rescue 1's not available. Oh, okay, well, how about Squad 26? Nope, Squad 26 is not available. Why? Squad 26 goes as little places as we do.
You're looking at your radio. Is this thing not working right?
So,
is there anyone can help us?
Yeah, so
now?
We clear that after doing all that, and we're going back at Ford Avenue. I'm looking at columns of smoke. I'm going, what are we missing? So I'm going to different channels. I'm in the tiller cab. What are we missing? So we're back in the quarters, and that's right around when the CVS had lit off, and there's some other stuff going on. And we ended up going to a couple other different fires and east to west and all this other stuff. But the looks that you would get going up the street, it didn't really feel like it was that different than any other night, other than the fact that it was much busier.
Yeah.
There was some people, there was a couple of companies that got stuff thrown at them. We didn't get anything thrown at us. It sounded like we were getting shot at one point. We were North and Asquith, maybe, I think. Anyway, you could hear gunshots in the background, but it was definitely high tension. But that's just Baltimore.
It's I don't think a lot of people. I didn't fully understand the makeup of Baltimore until the last few years. Just in my personal life, in my career, we've been picking up more and more clients down that way. So I've been spending more time down that way on trips. And I never really realized how tough of a city Baltimore is.
I told you to watch The Wire.
And that is so true. But last summer, for example, you'd come into work, 2 summers ago, and I'm always in early. That's just kind of how I am. I like to get in really early.
I saw that this morning.
Yeah, right. So I come in, take the guy who I'm relieving, take his gear off, put my gear on, go into the kitchen, start cooking, and you hear on the apparatus bay door. You go up, open the bay door, somebody shot laying in the street. And that would happen almost every shift for 2 or 3 shifts. Well, I shouldn't say 2 or 3 weeks rather. And guys beat up with a 2x4. We were out on a cardiac arrest one day. The chief calls up on the radio. I've got 4 people shot out front. And that's just...
Do you get machete attacks in Baltimore? People using a machete in a crime?
I'm sure it's happened. Okay. I haven't had it.
There is a string. Well, no, just because there was a same summer. There was a string of people hacking at people with a machete. Like it was like the weapon of choice in PG County, and I was.
Oh
like,
well, yeah. I mean, the PG and like the whole gang MS-13 stuff. That's like Langley Park area. I mean, they get I sure. Right. Yeah. I don't know.
Sorry.
We get like 5, 6 a day. I mean,
we have that around here.
Yeah.
that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But
Tucker's going to tell you about Hohokus the other day.
I think
Yeah, a suspicious person with a latte.
Right.
I think where I was going with this though is, I'm just kind of bringing it around full circle.
Yeah.
Is that, you grew up in Boston, you go to New York City,
Right.
you end up in Baltimore, and all the stuff in between makes you who you are today.
Yeah.
And now you're in a city that has an aggressive fire department, highly regarded with some of the best guys that you've ever served with.
Definitely.
You have this incredible burning passion for the job. So even regardless of injuries that's sustained on duty that you deal with every day, you're still going to work because you want to.
Yeah.
And it's a tough town. And you
Right.
see a lot of work, but you also see a lot of the downside of humanity.
Definitely. And that's something that, you'll see. This is kind of strange. We'll ride up and down Garrison Boulevard, which is one of the main thoroughfares in my district, and you'll see women who don't belong there. That they look clean today. Next week you come to work, they're standing in the same place in the same clothes, not as clean,
Right.
and it progressively gets worse as the days and weeks go on. If you pick up what I'm putting down,
Yeah.
and that's all the time. That area is very heavy for prostitution, very heavy for drugs.
I don't think that there's no place in this nation as good as Baltimore right now for a heroin epidemic. It's hit you guys pretty hard in that city.
it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, like, especially like if you go downtown, like Stedman, where the rescue is, and you go up Utah Street, they call it like Zombie Land.
Yep.
Lexington Market.
Yeah.
They're just moseying around, like nothing phases them. Or like the Baltimore lean. Can they get their head to touch their toes? As they're standing up, like that's all the time.
But I guess where I was going with this is that, that's got to take its toll.
Yeah,
And
it's the companies run a lot. I mean, whether you're downtown or you're on the east side or the west side, companies are running and running and running and running
Right.
all the time. We have suppression units that are outrunning medic units.
Wow.
Like 5 truck is, I don't know if they're going to break 6,000 runs or not, but they're at that point. And brand new, tiller truck, and it's getting beat up already. It's like two years old.
But I know there's a lot of neighborhoods that are burned up, boarded up, empty lot. I mean, it's
I don't know the exact number. I'm
Yeah.
sure someone can figure it out, but there's tens of thousands of vacant buildings. The governor at one point had put some money aside, and they were starting to tear down vacants.
Yeah.
But you can only spend so much money to do that. But the thing is, what actually is vacant, and everybody has that argument. So the vacant building didn't just catch on fire on its own.
yeah, right.
There had to be some
right.
human influence. So, you see, like you go into the alleyway and the way that like the blocks are set up, you'll have the row homes, the side street, and then the alleyway between the 2 blocks.
Right.
And you'll go through and there's all the overgrown grass, but then you've got the downtrodden path. You can tell where the vagrants go in, and that's where they use for a place of refuge.
Right.
That's where they live. Or you've got people who are victims of violence who get attacked, and that's where they're seeking shelter. Whatever the reason is, there's still somebody in there.
Yeah.
And you'll see a lot of people out there. Oh, you're not supposed to go in the vacants and blah blah blah. And well, you kind of have to. And not for nothing, but the other thing is, if you don't put out the middle room, it's going to keep burning.
Yeah.
We're going to be here all night.
Yeah. But I think I think how to wrap this and where I'm going with this is that there's that burning desire for the job.
Yeah.
Your bloodline has created who you are. The city you're in, I think, fits you perfectly.
Thank you.
I really do, because I listen to how much you love the job and you speak in detail, and we could talk for hours, and we're going to. When this camera turns off, there's actually a couple things I want to do that we're probably going to go back on camera and shoot a couple other things that I want to talk about, because you have such a pedigree and such a history behind you, the hours and hours of conversations. But to wrap this, what a culture, man. I mean, you grew up as a student of the fire industry. Yeah. And you are now under 40 years old. You're a few years behind me. And, man, I still see it, man. I see it on your Instagram pages. You and I have talked, texted. I just still feel that coming out of you, how much you love the job.
I tell everybody, this is the best job in the world. And, I see young kids at my other job where I work in the medical field. they're coming in for job application. I have to do their medical review, and I'm like, so what do you want to do with your life? And they're like, oh, well, I'd like to get into the police department, or I'd like to get into the fire department. And I'm like, well, do you have any exposure? Do you have any family in it? No. And I'm like, here, go look at this.
Yeah.
You're right. Should I be doing that? Another place of employment. Taking employment. No, but it's like you have to. And a lot of them are vets, guys who just came back from wherever overseas, and they would never volunteer. They never have anybody in their family. Maybe they just need that little bit of exposure. There's hey, this is where you can go and read something. This is where you can go to apply, and you never know the caliber of fireman you're going to get out of that.
They should really give us a course for firefighters that's called like the fire department guidance counselor, because I feel like there's a lot of that happens where people will take, I mean, even in our culture of mentorship, right? Like bringing those guys in and saying like, hey, did you learn something today? And this is where you get it. Like that's because it's really when you said that, it's like you're that guidance counselor kind of leading that guy into or girl into the into the spot to get the information to make the decision. And even growing up in a fire service family, I mean, like we talked about, you just found out that you could be paid. I never even heard of volunteers, but like the whole PG element, which is its own world, right? Yes.
And some of the best firemen around come out of PG County, right? I mean, that you can't even argue that. So I'd never heard of it. Like, I wish I knew about that when I was 18.
I say the same thing.
There's so many things, I didn't know anything. I knew that Chicago had the White Sox and the Cubs. Chicago, great fire department. There's great fire departments everywhere, but there's so many ways, like Christiana that gets talked about, and I know they've been talked about on this show. Wealth of knowledge, tremendous firemen, guys from all over that go there to volunteer. Who's heard of Delaware?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, really?
Joe Biden. All right. Cool.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Jack, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And, I just, I thank you, man. I thank you for sharing your story today. I know there's so much more to it. And we could go and go and go. But, you shared some personal stories today that I think, I think people can resonate with and so on. And so, I mean, we wish you nothing but the most success with your career.
Thank you for
and
having
your
me.
Health. We hope, that,
appreciate it.
You're standing upright. And if not, I'll hold you upright. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it's been a pleasure to have you. And, we've been going, but we're going to wrap and then we'll come back and we'll do some other stuff with you. Awesome. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you
gentlemen.
for joining us.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rob, you going to take us out on this?
I'm going to take us out.
You're going to take us out.
Yeah.
Do it.
All right. Everybody, Rob, National Fire Radio with the Irish Tillerman.
Thank you for having me.
Jack Dewan and Jeremy Tucker. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.
Be safe.
Thanks.